We live in an interactive world where new social media challenges pop up all the time. Some for enjoyment, some for a good cause, others are just plain dangerous. What if you tried a new challenge? One that could transform your life, community, and the world? What if you spent 40 days studying Jesus' words and applying his teachings to everyday life, all focused on 5 principles: being, forgiving, serving, giving, and going like Christ?
The Red Letter Challenge. This is what we've been in the midst of over the past few weeks, month or so, and today is our wrap-up, our celebration of the ways that God has been at work. And as I said, no extended sermon today, but instead the service punctuated by the pieces of the Red Letter Challenge, giving us a chance, number one, to reflect on each of those pieces, remind ourselves again of what they are and what it's all about. And two, maybe even more importantly, as we reflect on those things, as you hear about how God has been at work in the midst of them, committing to, thinking about how God is working in us and committing to be about the ways that he's prompting us as we move on from here. You're going to get a chance to do that today as we walk through our service, hearing about those things and getting a chance to make a commitment. In fact, I want to tell you this now and I'll remind you of it later. As you come up for communion, which is going to come earlier in the service today, I want to remind you that over here there is a table, and there's one on each side. I'll point to this one for now, but there's another one, same thing over there. There are 2 sheets of paper on that. One is a green one, and one is a white one. And I need you, those of you that are 6th grade and up, to pick up one of those on your way back from communion so that you've got what you need. One of each and something to write with if you don't have one already. So that we can use this Red Letter Challenge not just as a cool thing we did in the past, but as a launch pad so that we more and more fulfill that mission that God has given us to make disciples. So, let's start where the Red Letter Challenge began, with being. We had this as the symbol for it, and as we thought about it, one of the questions that was asked is, if God took time to rest, shouldn't we? And we read this verse, "Be still and know that I am God." And over the course of the challenge, I invited you to share reflections with me. And as I chanced to listen and talk to people in the narthex and throughout the week and in the Sunday morning life group, I want to share with you some highlights from that, the way that God was at work in the week of being. A mom of a teenager said, well, we sat down as our family, and my teenager actually stepped up and said, hey, I'll read the devotion this week, and did it 3 times in a row one week. There was a person who was a table host in the mission hall who, upon hearing about being and the importance of prayer, said, hey, can I get all the names and information from all the people at my table? I want to encourage them and pray for them. It prompted others to encourage one another and send a text to say, hey, how you doing today? If you got time to read this text, you got time to read the Bible. Are you making space for that? Cool to see people encouraging one another, and how families... Well, the imitation worked. There was one young couple that shared that as we read the Red Letter Challenge together, sitting in our living room, our kids that were bouncing off the walls all over the place all of a sudden stopped, paused, and listened as we read that devotion. They saw their parents were doing something significant. One talked about how reading the Red Letter Challenge rejuvenated me like the way the nap was. And this one maybe is one of my favorites from a longtime church member. Said, I know you talk about reading the Bible all the time, but this led me to actually do it, to hear these words and put them into practice. Read some others that shared talking about fasting. And this one wasn't from food, but it was from Facebook. And this person shared that when I fasted from this, I found I had space in my life to read the Bible where I didn't before. I found I had an ability to be present with my family in ways that I hadn't before. And man, I am thankful for that. Hearing the words of God and putting them into practice is core. It's what the whole challenge is about, and it starts with being with him. Would the children please come forward for a message especially for them? Good morning. Jesus loves you.
Jesus loves you too.
Yeah, we know that. But that's a hard thing sometimes to apply to ourselves. Our next topic here in the Red Letter Challenge as we walk through the main principles is forgiving. And it has those hands like two different people who are shaking hands and saying, look, I give forgiveness to you. Or maybe it's even, you could think of it as God's hand saying, look, I forgive you. You are pardoned. How many of you were here for the Sunday where we talked about forgiveness on Sunday morning here in worship? There was a time where we did we stood up and sat down, and there were questions that went up on the screen. Were any of you here for part of that? Are you there for part of that? Yeah. Well, it was a pretty powerful thing. See, we put some, as I think about it, as people have talked about how God impacted them through the week on forgiving, which is where God says, even though you're a sinner, I'm not going to make you pay the penalty. You're not going to be the one that pays for that. Instead, Jesus did it all for you. And that's sometimes that love from Jesus can be a hard thing for us to fully receive. And so I wanted to bring you guys up here today so that you could have the same perspective that I did on that day of the Forgiving Sunday. Because I got to stand up here and watch as we went through each one of those questions. And for those of you that weren't here on that Sunday, there were questions that went up on the screen, very personal ones, and each person in the worship had a chance to answer yes or no. I struggle with this, or I have struggled with it in the past, or I haven't struggled. And then we went through and we passed them all in, and then people came up, and after they'd been shuffled up, they picked up someone else's, and they went back to their seats, and we went through the questions again, asking those very personal questions again, but now you had the sheet with somebody else's answers on it, and you stood up if it was yes, and you sat down if it was no. And there was one lady I want to tell you about. She said I was nervous as we went through those questions, and question number one was, is there anything that you're continually ashamed about, that you just can't get past, you struggle to carry the burden of, that you deal with anxiety about that, you're nervous about it? And she said, when everyone stood up, almost 3/4 of the congregation, I went, take a deep breath with me. I'm not alone. So I want you guys, for a second here, come stand up, stand with me. We're going to come right inside the communion rail, right here, and I want you to face this way. So come on up in, right here, and I want you all to face that way so you can watch along with me. You don't need to come up on the steps, just right down on the floor here. All right, now, we're going to do another thing again, so you guys get to watch along with me. If you, congregation, were a part of the Red Letter Challenge in any way, you were a part of one of the sermons on Sunday morning, you did some of the challenges throughout the week, you were part of a life group in some way, you did one of the challenges, you read a portion of that, would you please stand? You're part of the Red Letter Challenge in any way. A lot of people were part of it. Now, watch this. If you were here every week for each one of the sermons, if you did stay standing, right away till you get to the end. If you were part of each one of the sermons, or you listened to it online, or you did each one of the challenges and read it faithfully each and every day, and did each of them really well and with excellence in a way that would be really honoring to God, would you please remain standing? If not, sit down. What do you guys think about that? Why don't you go have a seat down in front here? Did you see anybody that did it perfectly? No. You know what? I would have, if I wasn't standing up with you, I would have sat down too, because I didn't do it perfectly either. In fact, there's this thing, Paul, who is one of the best pastors and missionaries out there, as he talked about living this life where, Jesus tells us here in the Red Letter Challenge, if you put these words of mine into practice, you're a wise person, but if you do not put them into practice, you're like a foolish person. And Paul says, man, as I think about this, he said, I don't understand why I act the way I do. I don't know if I'm really a follower of Jesus. It seems like he's asking, because I don't do the good I want to do, but I do the evil that I hate to do. That's how I feel And I imagine it's how a lot of these people, even though they had good intentions, they still didn't get there. Paul wrapped it up this way. He says, "What a miserable person I am. Who will save me from this body that brings me death?" But then he says, "I thank God for his salvation through Jesus Christ our Lord." He said, even though I'm miserable, I know that God has saved me. So I want you guys to know this morning that even if you don't get it right, it doesn't mean that you're not a follower of Jesus. It means you need Jesus. And so we turn back to him again. And if he's prompting you to say, hey, come back to me. Hey, come try again. Hey, I'm still with you. That's what his promise is in baptism, that you would continue to be prompted, that he would continue to draw you in. And that's what a follower of Jesus is, one that continues to come back and say, hey, God, I messed up, and I need forgiveness again. Please help me do this differently this next time. This is who we now are, what was proclaimed there in Romans chapter 8. And really, I think as we think about being in the midst of the red letter challenge and being those who live out those red letters, that we're doing red letter living, maybe the first place that we would have thought is in the category of serving. That I'm going to put these words into practice by the things that I do in the midst of my life. And sometimes I think we get this goofed up that it's the serving that's going to lead God to be impressed by me. We fall off on that side of the horse sometimes. But the big principle that we bring here is that while serving others won't save you, it may help save someone else. And I heard that story told in the real life here. There was a food truck in the midst of our Red Letter Challenge. And there was one who had been a part of the food truck, a newer member to Holy Cross, and described that because you folks here really live out your faith, that's why I joined this church. I see people, they don't even have to be prompted or pushed along in all of this, but I see droves of people, 50 plus volunteers it takes to run a food truck that didn't have to be prompted into it, just told that there's an opportunity and they're jumping on it, and more people available and interested in doing it than there is space to fill sometimes. You guys really get it and really live it. God is at work among us so that we're the kind of place that looks like we're on mission because we are. Be encouraged by that and know that your actions are seen by others and do have an effect for the sake of their faith growth, and makes this an even more welcoming community. Two other things. One, a care team member. It's a group that's supporting pastoral care in the midst of the kind of making disciples who are caring for others. They're really living out this in a way that's dealing with the public requests that come for care in our congregation. They're going in and making phone calls and visiting hospitals. And there was one that shared, man, it was just so cool to serve and to meet someone in a hospital. And I didn't say any prayer that was all that amazing or speak some truth that they didn't know before, but I could be with them right there in that moment. And I was so blessed by that because I could see how God connected with them in that moment. How his promises had brought peace. And I was honored to be a part of that. Third one that talked about, was reflecting on serving in this week of the Red Letter Challenge and said, you know, it's when I grow the most. It was when I stepped up to be a deacon. And I had to talk about my faith some when I grew the most. And so I'm spurred along even more in this week and encouraged and reminded that I need to bear up and figure out what it takes to use my gifts and find out what they are so that I can serve, because that's how God is going to grow me. And we heard all kinds of people use it, like successes of being a blessing to doctors at chemo treatments by bringing treats along. One who shared, I have a different perspective on caring for my grandchildren, other parents talking about their children, because I understand that it's God's service through me to them. It gives me greater value in what I do. Others that talked about even things like serving others by holding open a door, and then later watching his children go and run and open doors for others, and how he was blessed to see God at work through the serving that he was doing, and now the next generation was doing the same. But there were struggles in this as well. And maybe in the midst of each one of these things, being, forgiving, now serving, you continue to think about the struggles. One shared as she had a chance to do the Take a Meal program that we've got for someone that's in the hospital and they come home, and we want to bring them meals so that they'd be blessed during that time. And this person shared, man, it just, there was no joy in it. I love doing this, and I was really disappointed because I had to rush to do that, and there were other things that came up in life, and I thought I'd have space to do this, and it ended up being a miserable thing for me. This person still got their meal, was still blessed, but I was bummed because usually it's such a blessing to me. And the reflection in this week was, sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes I've got to give up something of myself in order that others can be blessed. And as I think about it, that person was still blessed in the midst of it. And maybe my perspective shouldn't be in it, that I shouldn't be for what I get out of it, but rather for what God gets to give through me in the midst of it. I think people thought similar things about Giving Week. There's a sermon about how it's more blessed to give than to receive. And if you got the letters that went home, it reminded you about that blessed word. It's more joyful to give than to receive. And we were challenged this week that it's impossible to be a stingy follower of Jesus. Many, as they reflected on this week and shared with me, they said, boy, I thought I had this one down, but this is harder than I thought. I struggle to let go of stuff. I heard some people tell a similar story as to what my experience was. As you are done using things and stuff, there's a part of me that wants to hang on to the value and maximize them out and sell them on an online garage sale or one in my house. And I struggle to let go of stuff, but found freedom in doing that in this week so that my stuff had less hold on me. Has that ever been your experience? If not, give it a try. It is freeing. It's part of what God has freed us to. Reevaluate where I'm giving and why. It's because God has so blessed me. And the last one, Going Week. We're encouraged in the sermon to go home, to think about the ways that God has been a blessing to me and be able to articulate that, to share that with my mouth, one little step at a time. And for all of you in here, I would love to hear how that went this week. We've been meeting each and every week in the mission hall around round tables and talking about how it's going. And we've found that encouragement has spurred us along and encouraged us how God's working in other people's lives and spurred us to continue in and to dig in again, even if we missed everything in the week before, but to dig in and go ahead in the week ahead. But before you can go ahead, you got to think about where you've been. And I want you to take some quiet time now to evaluate where you are in each one of these things. Is this an area of weakness for me? Am I satisfied with where I'm at in this? Is that the way that God is laying it on my heart? Or is this something that actually God has blessed me with and I've strived for, and it's now a strength for me? And down at the bottom, tell us which of the challenges was easiest for you? What was about it was the most challenging? And what was the easiest? Know that these will be given anonymously. Please don't write your name on them, but they will help inform us as we seek to set up preaching series and message opportunities and Bible studies and life group materials so that we can tailor them to the ways that God is leading you to grow and where you are struggling along. So please take some quiet moments now to fill those out.